Hello and welcome to my review of the 2013 film All Hallows Eve, directed by Damien Leone. Now this is a different type of film for me to review because it's a horror anthology film, but I love those types of films. One of my favourite series of all time is the Amicus series of anthology films from the 60s and 70s, and more recently VHS 2, really enjoy those movies. So yeah, absolutely I was up for a horror anthology film. But that wasn't the reason I sort of stumbled across this film this week. I'd actually set out to watch a film called Terrifier, starring this kind of homicidal clown as the main villain, a character I'd sort of heard quite a lot about on YouTube and in various magazines and things and been sort of keen to see. And then I discovered that he'd actually already been in two films before his debut standalone film, these horror anthologies called All Hallows Eve and All Hallows Eve 2. So I thought, oh great, well I'll go all the way back to the beginning and watch this thing from the start because I like anthologies. So here we are. So this particular anthology film has three story segments, a fourth if you count the wraparound. If you don't know what a wraparound segment is in this type of movie, you'll hopefully get it when I explain what happens at the start of this film. So basically the movie starts with this babysitter who is in charge of a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old, a boy and a girl. And they've just come back from trick-or-treating, and in their little sweet bags they discover that somebody's dumped an old-style VHS tape in these bags. So they're a little bit spooked by this, but they put the tape on, curiosity gets the better of them, and this tape contains our three main stories that comprise the whole of the film, All Hallows Eve. So we're now going to watch what they're watching. It'll fill our screen up. I'm assuming that you might be new to this, okay? And so after each segment, we'll cut back to these kids and the babysitter to sort of get their reactions and how freaked out they're getting to each of these segments. And their tale is the wraparound tale, very common in a film like this. How important you think a film like this needs a wraparound, I don't know. Although one of my favourite anthology films of all time, Asylum, has a fantastic sort of connecting story that links its segments together, so I think it's important. And a film like VHS, which has terrific stories throughout its runtime, suffers a bit from having a really, really bad wraparound segment. So I think it's important, but other people might disagree and think, look, just dump the segments on screen and don't even bother with the connecting tissue. But there you have it. This particular one, as a starting point, is kind of mediocre, I think. I mean, it's an interesting setup with the camera being dumped into the suites, but the kids are really annoying characters, and I didn't enjoy the parts of this film where we come back to them now and again. It just kind of dragged. I'd have liked it if we'd have just seen them at the beginning and then seen them maybe at the end and just watched the three main parts back to back without even coming back to them that often. But so the three main stories that we get to, because this is the meat of the film, and all of them feature Art the Clown, but though only one of them quite predominantly. He's just kind of a guest cameo in two of them, and then in the third one he has his big moment where he's the main villain. But before we get to that point, we have the first and the second one. The first one is probably the weakest of the movie. I think this film has 2 out of 3. It can say that 2 of its 3 segments are extremely good, and that's a good ratio for this type of film. If you can get a horror anthology that only has 1 mediocre section, I think you're onto a winner, and this is the case here. But the first segment, I mean, we get introduced to Art. He has this really creepy scene in this train station. This is my first time seeing this character at all. I've never watched a clip of him before. I thought he was hilariously funny and terrifying at the same time, and that is not an easy combination to pull off. I was really, really impressed, and immediately I thought, yes, this is a really great new horror villain. But he sort of disappears from the segment, and this first story goes off on a tangent, and it's really weird where it goes from there, and not in a good way. And then it veers off into another tangent that's even less related to the first one. It's just a really bizarre story that just feels like it's being made up as it's going along. And it doesn't really have a great ending. Also, there's some violence that was a bit much for me. I mean, this is a violent movie overall throughout the entire runtime. All the segments are really violent, but I mean, I've got no problem with somebody's throat getting sawed out with a hacksaw. That sort of stuff, absolutely fine. But violence on a pregnant woman's stomach just kind of makes me squirm. And that was sort of part of the first sort of mini movie, and I didn't really like that bit. And it didn't help that the story I just didn't even understand what was going on, to be honest. So apart from the little Art the Clown introduction, the first story didn't really do it for me. But things improved after that, because stories 2 and 3, absolutely excellent. The second one had this antagonist that it was only in the second segment, and it's really, really good. The second part was spooky, and once it got going and you realised what the threat was, it was just amusing and just absolutely bonkers, but brilliant at the same time. It was a little bit extraterrestrial in nature, I'll say, without going into it too much and giving too much away, but I just really, really enjoyed the second part. And it's little sort of stories like this that make horror anthologies great, because you wouldn't have a big, long, full 90-minute film about what happens in this second segment. But as a little 20-minute piece, I thought it worked brilliant, and I was just really, really entertained by it. Funnily enough, one of my big takeaways from All Hallows Eve as a whole was how great Art the Clown is, and yet the irony is that I probably still enjoyed the second segment more than any of the others, and this was the one that didn't really have Art in it at all, apart from the tiniest little flicker of a cameo that was even less than what we got in the first part. So first segment, pretty poor on the whole. Second segment, really, really good. And the third segment is also really, really good. This is the one where Art takes centre stage, and we finally get to see how great he is in a fully formed story involving him. And it's kind of like a horror. It's a bit like the film The Hitcher, kind of on the highway with sort of one villain and one sort of protagonist. It's like a chase, bit of cat and mouse on this highway, except this is more at night time than The Hitcher. And yeah, very entertaining. It does kind of, there's a few sort of leaps of logic at times. Art in this film, I don't know if this is in all the films, Terrifier, All Hallows 2, etc., but he seems to be able to teleport like Jason Voorhees in Friday the 13th sometimes. It's a little bit kind of, how did he get from there that doesn't make any sense. But to be honest, all the way through this movie and all the segments, there's little bits of things that just don't make sense, almost to the point as if the writers thought, well, we're just going to make this a really entertaining anthology and screw logic and common sense and things like that, which, if that's the approach they were going for, I guess it works on the whole. But there was some parts to the third section where I was like, really, that doesn't make any sense because of blah, blah, blah. But I was still having a great time with it. I was still hugely entertained. Art is great. He's really, really terrific. And by the time the third segment was over, I was absolutely 100% sure that I wanted to go on and watch all the rest of these movies, All Hallows 2 and The Terrifier. I'm certainly fascinated to see how different Terrifier will be from these anthology films, but there you go. So the film finally comes back around and concludes with our wraparound. Hence, if you're new to this, you'll get the meaning of the word now. And there's a little twist at the end, which is kind of neat, but it without giving it away, it kind of makes me doubt whether the film actually happened, even in movie world. It feels like a kind of, like the writers are suggesting all of this may have been a kind of dream within a dream, a fictional video within a fictional video. It was kind of really bizarre, but come to think of it, and I look back at all the segments and just how lacking in logic some of the scenes and the story was at times, it did make me think it's a bit of a head screw, the whole thing. But it was good. I mean, if I bring the review axe down, I'm going to give it 4 bloody axes out of 5, because I think it was an excellent piece on the whole. And the only reason why I probably wouldn't give it 5 or 4.5 is because, like I said, the first section was definitely lacking. The wraparound was mediocre, and a few kind of just sprinkled bits here and there. I was like, what? How did that? But I mean, this is only an 85 minute film, I think, even with all the different sections, but I was wildly entertained. I mean, it's violent, it's funny, you never know where it's going. All 3 segments, I didn't know where they were going. That was a bad thing in the first one, but not with the second and third. So I would recommend this film whether you have a history of watching anthologies or not. I think this is a really good film. I'm really looking forward to the next one. So, All Hallows Eve, 4 bloody axes, and thoroughly recommended. And Art the Clown, you have to see this guy. This guy, he is deranged as hell, but God, is he fun to watch. He is really, really fun to watch. So, see you next time.